It feels as though everyone has heard some version of this urban myth, but my aunt lived through it. She had just moved to Tuscaloosa to attend the University of Alabama. Before she met my uncle, Aunt Linda was something of a party animal. You'd never guess it now with her crocheted shawls and low-heeled Mary Janes, but my father says it's a miracle she received her undergraduate with her liver intact. Though with what happened during her sophomore year, it's surprising she survived college at all. There had been a party at one of the sororities that night. It had quickly gotten out of hand, with people who didn't even attend the college gate-crashing. My aunt said she'd been hanging out with her then best friend, Kylie. They danced and drank, having the time of their lives, until a green-faced linebacker stumbled up to the pair. Aunt Linda said he smelled awful, like a cross between a brewery and a men's locker room, but Kylie seemed to like him. Not wanting to be the third wheel, Linda elected to give the two some space. It was a big party, and she was sure she would find some of her other friends lurking about, but this was before cell phones. She couldn't just call them up, and instead had to go wandering through the sorority house. As she looked around, this uneasy feeling settled over her. Someone was watching her. At first, she thought it might have been a friendly joke, but the longer it continued, the more paranoid she became. She kept looking over her shoulder, trying to figure out where that pervasive gaze originated. After an hour of this, she was too shaken up to stay. My Aunt Linda exited the party shortly after midnight, but leaving did not settle her nerves. To save on money, my aunt wasn't staying in the campus dorms, and instead had rented a small apartment with Kylie outside the city. This means that she had a long drive home. As she got into her car, she could still not shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She nervously looked back towards the sorority house, the distant yellow lights shining in the window, and tried to tell herself that she'd start feeling safer on the road. The shadows in the trees lining the roads loomed over her car like vigilant giants. No other vehicles were on the road, but my Aunt Linda was still biting her nails to the quick, certain that someone was watching. Then a semi-truck pulled behind her. Its engine roared into the quiet night and followed her car too closely to be safe. My aunt honked the horn, trying to get him to ease off the tailgating, but the truck just grew closer, flashing its high beams and nearly blinding my aunt. Terrified, she pulled off at the nearest gas station and quickly ran for the store. She heard footsteps behind her and, thinking it was the trucker, sprinted as fast as she could. She burst through the shop door, looking around frantically for somewhere to hide or something she could use to defend herself. But before deciding on anything, there was a loud, shattering noise. My aunt hesitantly turned to see what had happened. At the door was a young man with patchy red facial hair, panting heavily. Beneath him, halfway through the broken glass door, was a skinny man dressed in black. Apparently, the skinnier fellow had been in my aunt's back seat, looming over her with a knife when the trucker had pulled behind her. He'd shined the high beams and honked his horn, disorienting him before he could strike the killing blow. After my aunt had exited her car, her assailant pursued her on foot, but the trucker once again stopped the would-be murderer by body slamming him through the gas station door. I had just gotten back from a work trip in Memphis. My bones were aching from being cooped up in the car, and I could barely hold my eyelids open. When I got home, I just swung my luggage onto the couch before haphazardly collapsing into my chair. Not 30 minutes after falling asleep, my phone started pinging in short, sharp bursts. I sleepily dug my phone out of my pocket and saw all the texts were from my ex-wife, Miranda. "Where are you? Tonight is Kelsey's dance recital, remember?" I sighed. It was a little after 6:40, but I was pretty sure the dance didn't start until 7. dry drool on my cheek and the bags under my eyes made me look like the poster child for insomnia. But I figured a dad who looked like he just rolled out of a garbage bin was marginally better than a completely absent father. I texted Miranda back. On my way. After splashing some cold water onto my face, I went out to my car. Then came the problem. I was apparently out of gas. It might have driven for another mile, but the nearest gas station was over 5 away. I pulled out my phone to text Miranda the bad news, but then my eyes caught on my most recently downloaded app, Uber. I'd used it in Memphis. Why couldn't I use it to traverse the back roads of Tennessee? The pricing was exorbitantly high, but it went through. Matt, who drove a blue Ultima, was scheduled to arrive at my house at 6:50. That meant I'd only be about 10 minutes late to Kelsey's recital. Matt arrived early, and I slipped into the back seat of his car. We exchanged the usual pleasantries and small talk, but that fizzled out quickly as Miranda's texts kept coming. I can't believe you're missing another performance. I'd only missed one singular performance, but that was going to be held over my head until the end of time. I was furiously texting Miranda when I got an alert. Please return to your Uber. I clicked the notification and it showed that my GPS location was bugged, or so I thought, having me remain in one place while the Uber seemed to be speeding along, heading toward my destination. I looked up to tell the driver what was happening, but was startled to see he was staring back at me. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Keep your eyes on the road." But he didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with this utterly blank look. I was going to rush past him to grab the wheel, but then I noticed something was wrong with his face. His features seemed to be shifting, morphing. His eyes were growing larger, and his mouth was widening. He kept staring at me. I looked down at my phone and saw that I was still in one spot. The Uber driver was moving farther and farther away. What was going on? When I looked back up, I saw that Matt's expression had changed. With his too wide mouth, he was smiling at me. He took his hands off the wheel, reaching them over his head and bending them backward, unnaturally. I pressed my back farther into the seat, trying to swat him away. "You have arrived at your destination," my phone announced. But we were still on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. Matt grabbed my arm while I'd been distracted, and his grip was tight. I couldn't break it. He slowly began pulling my fingers toward his mouth. He bit down on the tip of my middle finger, and I grimaced in pain. My hand found the door handle, and I jumped out of the car, not caring about whatever injuries occurred, as long as they didn't entail being eaten alive. Instead of landing on the expected dirt road, I hit the pavement outside of the show house. The lights were off, and the theater was empty. The blue Ultima was behind me, but there was no sign of Matt. I checked my phone and was shocked to see it was 9 p.m. I had a bunch of angry texts from Miranda, but one was not from her. From your Uber driver. "Hey man, you fell asleep in the back seat and I couldn't wake you up. I ran to get something to eat. Don't try anything weird, I've got a dash cam." I kept trying to tell myself that everything was just a crazy dream. But I still have a scar on my middle finger from the bite. I had gotten off work late that night. It was around 10 p.m., and I had a 30-minute drive home, but my eyes were drooping like I wasn't going to make it. The road to my house is long and dark, with only a few houses and the odd gas station lining the way. It's not the type of place you'd like to live if your car is as unreliable as mine. About halfway through the drive, the engine started making this strange rattling sound. My car is no stranger to bizarre noises, but I've never heard it make this one before. There wasn't much of a shoulder on the side of the road, just a narrow strip of grass next to a deep ditch, but I had to pull over anyway. As I got out, carefully stepping out of the driver's side, a black car with its headlights turned off rushed by me. It was literally inches away from hitting me. Panicked, I cursed at the car, holding up my middle finger. Who drives on a dark road with their headlights off? After I'd caught my breath, I opened up the hood of my car. I'm no mechanic, but I'm pretty sure that nothing is supposed to be smoking. I closed the hood, hoping that my car wasn't on the brink of exploding. With no other option, I pulled out my phone and dialed up my roommate, praying he'd still be awake. "Dude?" he answered after a couple of rings. "Why are you calling so late?" "Hey, thank God you answered. I need to ask a favor of you. I broke down on the way home and I really need someone to pick me up." He let out a long, tired sigh, but told me, "All right, you owe me. Drop a pin in your location." "Thanks, man." I sent my location to him and looked towards my smoking hood. The buzz of cicadas and the rhythmic croak of frogs were the only sounds I could hear. I was still tired, and the night air was chilly. I wasn't sure how safe it was to go back into my vehicle, but I figured 20 minutes wouldn't kill me. It for sure beats being at the mercy of mosquitoes and gnats. Deciding that I was going to get back into my car, I stepped back out onto the road. It was pitch black outside, but I listened for a nearing sound of an engine while anticipating the yellow glow of headlights. It should have been perfectly safe, but as soon as I set foot upon the pavement, that black car sped by again. This time it was close enough that I could see it had no license plate, and the emblem had been removed, but it was some sort of sedan. I was startled by the sheer speed of it rushing by, and I fell backward into a dirt ditch behind me. I remember thinking, is this guy trying to kill me or something? My uniform was coated with dirt and dew, and while I'd been angry the first time the car rushed by, now I was scared. I slipped into the passenger side of my car, thinking I would be safe there. Then, for what seemed like 10 minutes or so, everything was calm. I figured the psycho in the sedan had just moved on. But the thought was quickly revoked. I heard the crash before I realized what had happened. Luckily, the road is curvy, so the driver of that black sedan couldn't really gain much speed, but I'm certain that he slammed into the back of my car as hard as he could. My car was still intact, and I wasn't hurt, just jostled around in my seat, but I was panicking. This guy was literally trying to kill me, wasn't he? I didn't know if it was because I'd given him the finger or if he'd just originally been inclined to run me over, but I was in danger. I got out of my car, surprised at how far I'd been pushed, and ran over to the shoulder. I don't know why I couldn't hear the sedan's engine anymore. Maybe he'd modified it to be quiet, but I wasn't aware of how close he was. That is, until he sped by me again. I ducked my head down, receding further into the ditch, laying low in the hopes that he wouldn't notice me. Fortunately, I didn't have to remain in that position for very long. My roommate arrived shortly after. I sprinted to his car, hopped into the passenger seat, and started shouting at him, "Drive! Drive!" The sedan suddenly raced out of the darkness and rear-ended my roommate's vehicle. I couldn't make out anything about the driver of the sedan, but my roommate stepped on the gas, and we hightailed it out of there. When we got home, I called and filed a police report, but not much came of it. I still shiver when I think about what might have happened if my roommate had arrived any later.